He built a treehouse for his daughter. The new neighbor climbed up first. Late one summer afternoon, Miles Bennett hammered the final nail into the treehouse. Thunk. He lowered the hammer and stepped back. 3 weeks of early mornings, late nights after Ruby had fallen asleep, splinters, crooked measurements, 2 ruined ladders, 1 accidentally broken window. Every bit of it had been worth it. The little cedar treehouse stood proudly between the branches of the old maple tree in the backyard. A tiny front porch, white railing, a rope ladder, flower boxes beneath the windows. Even a small wooden sign. Ruby's treehouse. Miles folded his arms and smiled to himself. Perfect. Just then, a cheerful voice floated down from somewhere above. "Excuse me." He turned toward the fence. Nobody. The porch? Empty. The yard? Nothing. His eyebrows knitted together. "Hello?" Then he noticed it. 2 legs swinging lazily over the edge of the treehouse roof. A young woman sat comfortably on top of it, casually eating an apple, as if she'd owned the place for years. She smiled and gave him a little wave. "Hi. Nice to meet you." Miles stared at her. "That's my daughter's treehouse." The woman looked around with exaggerated curiosity. "Oh, I know." She took another bite of her apple. "I just wanted to see the view." Before Miles could process what was happening, the back door burst open. "Daddy!" 6-year-old Ruby raced across the yard carrying a box of crayons. She stopped, looked up, gasped dramatically, then pointed toward the roof. "I think our new neighbor stole my birthday present." Miles Bennett had spent the last 4 years building exactly one thing: a peaceful life. After the divorce, life had become wonderfully predictable. Wake up, make Ruby breakfast, drive her to school, build furniture, pick her up, read bedtime stories, repeat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. When Ruby casually mentioned one afternoon that she'd always wanted a treehouse, like the kids in cartoons, Miles had quietly begun planning. For nearly 3 weeks he worked in secret. Only after Ruby went to bed, only while she was at school. Every board had been measured twice, every railing sanded smooth enough for tiny hands. He wanted to give his daughter something magical, something built with love. He just hadn't planned for the new neighbor to move in before the surprise. Sadie Brooks had arrived only 2 days earlier, 25, illustrator, owner of approximately 300 books, 7 houseplants, and an unstoppable curiosity. As soon as she'd seen the treehouse rising above the fence, she'd thought exactly one thing. "I wonder what the view looks like." Most people would have knocked on the front door. Sadie climbed the tree. It had seemed like the logical choice. At least, it had until the owner showed up holding a hammer. Miles looked up again. "Would you mind coming down?" Sadie tilted her head. "I could. That doesn't sound very promising. But I'm actually comfortable up here." Miles sighed. "You're sitting on my daughter's birthday surprise." "Oh," she blinked. "That does make me the villain." "It certainly doesn't help." She looked genuinely apologetic. "Sorry, I'll climb down." She stood, took one careful step, then another. Halfway to the ladder she froze. "Tiny problem." Miles crossed his arms. "What tiny problem?" "I may have forgotten. How I got up here." He stared. "You climbed up." "I know. I don't remember the route." "You climbed a tree." Apparently very confidently. Miles rubbed his forehead. "I can't believe this." "Neither can I." With a resigned sigh, Miles climbed after her. "Just stay where you are." "I wasn't planning to go sightseeing." A minute later he reached the roof. "Okay, turn around. Grab the ladder." "I can't reach it." Miles leaned farther. The branch beneath him groaned. Sadie frowned. "That sound doesn't feel encouraging." "It will." Crack. Miles's foot slipped between 2 support beams. He didn't fall, but his leg became hopelessly wedged. He looked down, then at Sadie. "Don't laugh." She tried. Her lips trembled. "I'm sorry." A tiny snort escaped. Then another. Within seconds she was laughing so hard she nearly dropped the apple. "I'm sorry. I'm really trying." Miles sighed dramatically. "I appreciate the effort." The back door opened again. Ruby walked into the yard carrying a juice box. She looked up, saw her father stuck in his own treehouse, covered her mouth, then exploded into laughter. "Daddy, you're trapped. I noticed. You built it. I also noticed." Ruby laughed so hard she had to sit down in the grass. "I've never seen you lose to a tree." Sadie wiped tears from her eyes. "Neither have I." Miles looked between the two of them, I feel incredibly supported. It took nearly 20 minutes. A ladder, 2 neighbors, and an embarrassing amount of pulling. Eventually Miles climbed down with what little dignity remained. Sadie stood awkwardly beside him. I really am sorry. He looked at her. So am I. She blinked. For what? Meeting you. For 1 second she looked offended. Then she burst into laughter. I think we're going to get along. Miles wasn't so sure. The next evening, someone knocked on the door. Ruby opened it before Miles reached the hallway. It's the Treehouse thief. Sadie held up a metal tin. Peace offering. I made cookies. Miles accepted the box cautiously. He searched for the right word. Very dark. One cookie had somehow fused itself to another. Ruby whispered loudly, Are they supposed to sparkle? Sadie looked embarrassed. They spent slightly longer in the oven than intended. Miles picked one up, took a bite, chewed, very slowly. Sadie watched with obvious anxiety. Well? Miles nodded thoughtfully. Tastes. He swallowed. Braver than I am. Sadie laughed so hard she almost dropped the tin. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. Ruby stole a cookie, bit into it. She frowned. I think mine fought back. All 3 burst into laughter. For the first time since moving in, the fence between their houses didn't feel like a boundary anymore. It felt like the beginning of a friendship. Over the next week, Sadie somehow became a daily visitor. She claimed she was only checking whether the treehouse had survived. Ruby insisted she stay and color, then read books, then build paper airplanes, then have lemonade. Miles suspected his daughter had discovered the art of strategic invitations. One Saturday afternoon, after another hour of laughter inside the treehouse, Ruby climbed onto the porch railing and cleared her throat dramatically. I have an announcement. Miles immediately looked nervous. Whenever Ruby made announcements, something expensive usually happened. She pointed proudly at Sadie. From now on, she paused for effect. Miss Sadie is responsible for playing with me forever. Sadie placed a hand over her heart. I accept this extremely important responsibility. Miles blinked. You don't even want to negotiate? Nope. Ruby jumped up and hugged Sadie. Yay! Then she looked back at her father with a grin far too mischievous for a 6-year-old. Good. Now you won't be lonely when I'm at school. Miles opened his mouth, closed it again. Sadie tried very hard not to smile. It didn't work. Somehow, in less than a week, the strange girl who had climbed into the wrong treehouse had quietly climbed into their everyday life as well. After the cookie incident, something quietly changed. Nobody officially invited Sadie into their routine. She simply became part of it. Every afternoon around 4, Ruby would run to the backyard, stand on the little bridge connecting the treehouse ladder to the grass, and yell toward the neighboring yard. Sadie! A voice would answer almost immediately. Coming. Sometimes she climbed over the fence. Sometimes she used the gate. Miles noticed she still preferred climbing. I'm beginning to think you don't believe in doors. They're optional. They're literally the reason people build fences. She grinned. And yet she effortlessly climbed over the fence anyway. Here we are. Miles shook his head. I worry about you. You've known me 3 weeks. I've known gravity much longer. Ruby giggled. Daddy lost. I noticed. As an illustrator for children's books, Sadie had an endless imagination. She turned ordinary afternoons into adventures. One day the treehouse became a pirate ship. The next, a castle floating above the clouds. Then a detective agency searching for the missing peanut butter sandwich. Ruby adored every minute of it. One afternoon, Sadie spread a giant roll of paper across the treehouse floor. Today, she announced dramatically, we're drawing dreams. Ruby immediately picked up a crayon. I want to draw Daddy. That's sweet. Fighting a dragon. Sadie nodded seriously. Very realistic. Miles, who was carrying a toolbox underneath the treehouse, looked up. I heard that. Ruby leaned over the railing. The dragon lost. I appreciate your confidence. Sadie watched Ruby carefully sketch enormous wings onto Miles, then tiny fairy wings onto herself. You gave yourself fairy wings? I need transportation. Ruby looked thoughtful. Can Daddy have wings too? No. He has a truck. Miles couldn't help laughing. In return, Miles decided Sadie should finally learn something useful. Woodworking. You make stories. He placed a pair of safety glasses into her hands. I make furniture. Today, You learn both. Sadie looked suspiciously at the workbench. Does this end with me missing a finger? Not if you listen. I usually don't. I know, Ruby whispered loudly. Daddy's already nervous. I am not. You checked the first aid kit twice. Miles sighed. 3 times. The lesson started well. Miles demonstrated how to hold the drill, where to apply pressure, how to keep it steady. Easy. Sadie nodded confidently. I've got this. She pressed the trigger. The drill slipped. The screw missed the target completely. The spinning bit punched straight through the seat of an unfinished wooden chair. Everyone froze. Sadie slowly lifted the drill away. There was now a perfectly round hole through the middle of the chair. Miles stared at it, then quietly said, "That chair had a family." Sadie looked at the hole, tilted her head. "I'm improving ventilation." Ruby examined the chair thoughtfully. "I like her." Miles looked from the ruined chair, to Sadie, to Ruby. "I seem to be the only person mourning this chair." Sadie raised a hand. "I'll buy you another one." "You can't." "Why not?" "I made this one." She blinked. "Oh," a pause. "Can you make another?" Miles tried very hard not to smile. "I suppose I can." Ruby pointed at the damaged chair. "We should keep it." "Why?" "So when people ask what happened." She grinned. "We can tell them Sadie attacked it." Sadie burst into laughter. "I object." Too late. The chair already testified. The weeks slipped by almost unnoticed. Miles realized he had begun looking toward the neighboring yard every evening, not because he expected anything, simply because Sadie usually appeared, sometimes carrying iced tea, sometimes carrying sketchbooks, once carrying a pie that somehow contained far too much cinnamon. He never complained. She never stopped bringing food. Ruby eventually announced, "I think we're accidentally becoming a family." Both adults answered at exactly the same time. "We're not." Ruby folded her arms. "That's exactly what people who are becoming a family would say." Neither of them had a response. Near the end of September, a heavy thunderstorm rolled across town. Rain poured against the windows. Wind bent the maple branches until the treehouse swayed gently. Ruby stood by the back door wearing a tiny raincoat. "We should check on it." Miles looked outside. "In this weather? What if it's lonely?" "The treehouse?" "Yes." Sadie, who had come over just before the storm started, smiled. "I think she's got a point." Miles stared. "You're encouraging this." "I absolutely am." 20 minutes later, the 3 of them climbed into the treehouse carrying blankets, flashlights, hot chocolate, and an unreasonable amount of marshmallows. Rain drummed softly against the cedar roof. The windows fogged from their warm drinks. It felt like a tiny world floating above the storm. Ruby insisted on telling ghost stories. Unfortunately, they weren't remotely scary. "And then," she whispered dramatically, "the ghost forgot where he lived." Sadie gasped. "What happened next?" "He rented an apartment," Miles blinked. "That's surprisingly responsible." Ruby shrugged. "Housing is expensive." The 3 of them laughed until the rain nearly drowned out their voices. Later they played card games, then made shadow puppets on the wooden walls. Eventually the storm settled into a gentle rhythm. The treehouse rocked softly with the wind, warm, safe and quiet. Ruby curled beneath a blanket between them. Within minutes, she was asleep. Miles leaned back against the wall. "I should carry her inside." Sadie looked toward the rain outside. "Maybe after it slows." He nodded. The steady sound of rainfall, the warmth, the long week. Without realizing it, Miles closed his eyes. When Sadie noticed, she smiled. He looked so different while sleeping. The constant responsibility disappeared from his face. For the first time, he simply looked like a man who was tired. Very gently, she rested her head against his shoulder. Just for a moment. Outside, rain tapped softly against the roof. Inside, everything felt peaceful. Click. A tiny sound broke the silence. Sadie looked down. Ruby's eyes were open. She was holding Miles' phone. "When did you wake up?" Sadie whispered. "Just now." Ruby proudly held up the screen. "I took a picture." Sadie reached for the phone. "Let me see." On the screen, Miles slept peacefully while Sadie leaned against his shoulder. Neither of them looked posed. Neither of them knew the picture was being taken. It simply looked like home. Ruby giggled and tapped the save button, then renamed the photo with complete satisfaction. "My future evidence." Sadie laughed so hard she had to cover her mouth. Miles stirred slightly but didn't wake. Ruby whispered triumphantly, "One day, I'm definitely showing this to Daddy." Ruby kept her promise. 3 days after the storm, she showed Miles the photograph. He was standing at the kitchen counter making pancakes when she held his phone directly in front of his face. "Daddy, you need to see the evidence." Miles glanced at the screen, then froze. In the picture, he was asleep inside the treehouse. Sadie rested against his shoulder. Ruby was barely visible at the bottom of the frame, grinning like a detective who had solved the crime of the century. Miles slowly looked toward Sadie. She was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, trying very hard to appear innocent. "You knew about this?" Sadie took a careful sip. Define knew. "You helped her take it?" "No. You helped her name it." A pause. "Possibly." Miles looked back at the title. "My Future Evidence." Ruby climbed onto her chair. "I'm saving it for the wedding." Miles nearly dropped the spatula. Sadie laughed into her coffee. "The pancakes are burning. They were doing fine before everyone started planning my marriage." Ruby sniffed the air. "They're definitely not doing fine now." After that night in the treehouse, Sadie became part of their lives in ways none of them discussed. It happened through small things. She began joining them for dinner, at first only once a week, then twice, then so often that Miles started automatically setting 3 places at the table. Sadie attempted to cook. The results were unpredictable. Her pasta sauce was excellent. Her grilled cheese was somehow both burnt and cold. Her first meatloaf leaned strangely to one side. Ruby examined it carefully. "Is it supposed to look tired?" Sadie placed her hands on her hips. "It's rustic." Miles cut a slice. "It appears to be trying to escape the plate." She pointed the serving spoon at him. "Eat your rustic dinner." He did. He even asked for seconds, not because it was particularly good, but because Sadie looked absurdly pleased every time he took another bite. Some mornings, when Miles had an early delivery at the workshop, Sadie walked Ruby to school. The first time, Miles gave her a list of instructions. Ruby's lunch was in the blue bag. Her homework folder was yellow. She needed her library book. She couldn't wear rain boots unless it was actually raining. Sadie listened seriously, then looked at Ruby. "Does he always give this many instructions?" Ruby nodded. "He once wrote down how to use the toaster." There were settings. Miles defended himself. "There are 2 settings." "Exactly." Sadie took Ruby's hand. "We'll try to survive." Miles watched them leave through the front gate. Ruby skipping, Sadie swinging their joined hands. Something warm settled in his chest. Something dangerous. Something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Homework became another ritual. Ruby sat at the kitchen table while Sadie helped with spelling, and Miles worked nearby. Sadie made every lesson into a game. Vocabulary words became characters. Math problems became mysteries. When Ruby had to write a sentence using the word responsible, she wrote, "Sadie is responsible for ruining Daddy's chair." Miles read it twice. Accurate. Sadie looked offended. "I prefer the term redesigning." Ruby added another sentence. "Daddy is responsible for staring at Sadie when she isn't looking." The kitchen went silent. Miles slowly lowered the worksheet. Sadie bit her lip to keep from laughing. Ruby looked between them. "Did I spell staring correctly?" "Yes," Sadie said brightly. Miles cleared his throat. Next word. For Sadie, those ordinary evenings began to mean more than she admitted. She had grown up learning not to become too attached to places, or people. Before she was adopted at 12, she'd moved through temporary homes where every bedroom belonged to someone else first. She had learned to keep her belongings in one suitcase, to never decorate the walls, to never ask how long she could stay. Even after finding a loving adoptive family, a small part of her still expected every good thing to end without warning. But the Bennett house felt different. Ruby left drawings on Sadie's refrigerator. Miles repaired the loose step on her porch without being asked. There was always a cup waiting for her at breakfast, a blanket waiting in the treehouse, a place at the table. For the first time in her life, Sadie stopped feeling like a guest. That frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. Ruby noticed everything, especially the things adults tried not to say. One afternoon, Sadie helped her tie ribbons around a school project. Ruby leaned closer and whispered, "Thanks, almost, Mom." Sadie's hands stopped. Miles, standing across the room, nearly dropped the wooden frame he was holding. "Ruby, what? You can't call people that." "Why?" "Because—" Miles searched for an explanation. Sadie watched him struggle. Her smile slowly grew. "Because it's weird," he finally said. Ruby frowned. It isn't weird. She's almost here every day. That's not what almost mom means. It could. Sadie laughed. Miles turned red all the way to his ears. Ruby looked delighted by the reaction. From then on, she used the nickname whenever possible. Almost mom, can you help with my hair? Almost mom, Daddy forgot the snacks. Almost mom, tell Daddy glitter is not dangerous. Miles objected every time. Sadie only laughed harder. One clear evening, after Ruby had supposedly gone to sleep, Miles and Sadie climbed onto the treehouse roof. The night was cool. Stars stretched above the branches. From there, the neighborhood looked quiet and distant. Sadie held 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Miles had brought a blanket. They sat close enough that their shoulders touched. For a while neither spoke. Then Miles said softly, "Ruby hasn't been this happy in a long time." Sadie looked down at her cup. "She's easy to love. So are you." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Sadie turned toward him. Miles looked nervous. Naturally, he reached for a loose piece of railing. "There isn't anything to fix," she whispered. "I know." "Then stop trying." His hand fell away. The space between them became very small. Miles looked at her lips. Sadie stopped breathing. He leaned closer. She did too. The treehouse door flew open. "I knew it." Miles jerked backward so quickly he nearly slid off the roof. Sadie clutched his sleeve. Ruby stood in the doorway wearing pajamas and a victorious grin. "Ruby." Miles pressed one hand to his chest. "You're supposed to be asleep." She giggled. "I wasn't sleeping. We can see that. I was conducting surveillance." Sadie laughed until tears filled her eyes. Ruby pointed between them. "You were going to kiss." "No, we weren't," Miles said too quickly. Ruby nodded wisely. "That's what guilty people say." The next afternoon, Sadie walked home carrying Ruby's forgotten sketchbook. As she reached the fence, she heard 2 neighbors talking near the sidewalk. "Did you hear?" one woman said. "Ruby's mother is coming back." Sadie stopped. The other neighbor lowered her voice. "After all these years?" "Apparently next week." Sadie's fingers tightened around the sketchbook. The laughter from the previous night disappeared. In its place came an old, familiar fear. People returned. Families repaired themselves. Temporary people were thanked, then quietly removed. Memories flashed through her mind. Packed bags. Closed doors. Adults saying, "This isn't your fault." A bedroom that had never really been hers. Through the kitchen window, she saw Miles helping Ruby with breakfast. Ruby was laughing. Miles brushed flour from her nose. They looked complete. Sadie suddenly saw herself exactly as she'd always feared. Not family, not permanent, only someone filling an empty space until the real person came back. She left the sketchbook on the porch, then walked home without knocking. That evening, Ruby called across the fence. "Sadie." Sadie stood behind her curtain, silent. The next day, she said she had work. The day after that, a headache. By the end of the week, she stopped climbing the fence entirely. Miles noticed. Ruby noticed. And Sadie kept telling herself that leaving first would hurt less than being left behind again. Miles gave Sadie space for exactly 3 days. On the 4th, he stopped pretending he wasn't confused. She no longer climbed over the fence, no longer appeared at breakfast carrying coffee. She stopped answering Ruby's invitations with cheerful excuses and started replying with short messages. "Busy today. Deadline. Maybe next week." Miles read each one more times than necessary, then told himself it didn't matter. It mattered. A lot. Ruby noticed first. She sat at the kitchen table, pushing blueberries around her pancake. "Sadie doesn't like us anymore." Miles looked up. "That's not true. Then why doesn't she come over? She's working." "She always works." Ruby narrowed her eyes. "Maybe you did something." Miles nearly choked on his coffee. "Why would you assume that?" "Because you're bad at girls." "I'm not bad at girls." Ruby stared at him. Miles sighed. "Fine. I'm not especially experienced. You told her you weren't going to kiss her." I panicked. "That's worse." Miles pointed his fork at her. "You are 6, and still better at this." At the workshop that afternoon, Miles tried to focus on a walnut dining table. He measured the same board 3 times, cut it wrong twice, then spent 10 minutes searching for a pencil tucked behind his ear. Finally, he put down the sander and opened his phone. He typed, "Why is my neighbor suddenly avoiding me?" The AI responded almost immediately. Possible reasons include discomfort, misunderstanding, personal stress, or unresolved feelings. The best approach is to have an honest conversation. Miles stared at the screen. That sounds difficult. One of his employees looked over from the other side of the shop. Did your phone just reject you? No. Did a woman reject you? Miles locked the screen. Get back to work. The employee smiled. So yes, Miles did attempt an honest conversation, or at least, a version of one. That evening he found Sadie collecting mail outside her house. Hey, she stiffened almost imperceptibly. Hey, you've been busy. Very. Ruby misses you. Sadie looked toward the Bennett house. A small face disappeared quickly behind the living room curtain. I miss her too. Miles waited. Sadie said nothing else. He rubbed the back of his neck. Did I do something? No. Did Ruby? No. Did the chair? That almost made her smile. Almost. The chair knows what it did. Miles stepped closer. Then what happened? Sadie's heart pounded. She wanted to ask him directly. Is Ruby's mother coming back? Do you want her back? Was I only here because she wasn't? Instead, she said, nothing happened. Miles studied her face. He knew that wasn't true. But before he could press further, a dark sedan pulled into his driveway. Both of them turned. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. Elegant. Tired. Too thin. Ruby appeared at the Bennett front door. Her expression changed instantly. Mama? Sadie stopped breathing. Miles looked stunned. The woman closed the car door with trembling hands. Hi, sweetheart. Ruby didn't run forward. She stayed where she was. Miles crossed the yard toward her. Sadie stepped backward. He glanced at her as if he wanted to explain, but Ruby called his name, and Sadie quietly went inside. The woman was Claire Bennett, Miles's ex-wife. 4 years earlier, she had left for California after accepting a demanding position with an international design company. At first, she promised regular visits. Then visits became calls. Calls became birthday messages. Eventually, even those became rare. Ruby remembered her mostly through old photographs. Miles remembered her through unanswered questions. Claire stood in the kitchen now, holding a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Ruby sat beside Miles, close enough that their arms pressed together. I know I don't deserve to ask for anything, Claire said. Miles remained quiet. She looked at Ruby. I came because I need to tell you the truth. Ruby's fingers curled around Miles' sleeve. Claire swallowed. I've been diagnosed with lymphoma. Miles' expression changed. Not into love, not forgiveness. Something more complicated. Human concern. Claire continued. The doctors believe treatment can work, but it will be difficult. And before it begins, her voice broke. I couldn't keep pretending I had more time to become brave. Ruby looked at her father. What does that mean? Claire wiped her eyes. It means I was selfish. I left, and every year I told myself I'd fix it later. But later kept moving. Miles' jaw tightened. You should have called first. I know. You don't get to arrive without warning and ask her to carry your guilt. I know that too. Claire nodded, crying now. I'm not here to take her. I'm not here to ask you to forgive me. I only want the chance to apologize. Ruby looked down. After a long silence, she whispered, Are you leaving again? Claire closed her eyes. Yes, for treatment. But this time, if you'll let me, I want to keep calling. Ruby didn't answer. She leaned against Miles instead. He wrapped an arm around her. Over the next several days, Claire visited briefly, always with Miles present. No promises, no suggestion that she and Miles could become anything again. They were two parents trying to help a child understand an apology that had arrived years too late. But Sadie saw only fragments. Claire sitting beside Ruby on the porch. Miles handing Claire a glass of water. The three of them walking slowly through the backyard. From a distance, they looked like a family. Sadie never heard Miles tell Claire, I hope your treatment works. But also, we are not starting over. She never heard him say, Ruby deserves honesty, and my life is here now. She only saw the shape of the thing she'd always feared, a missing piece returning to its place, and herself becoming unnecessary. 2 days later, Sadie received an email from a publishing studio in Seattle. Months earlier, she'd applied for a full-time position illustrating a new children's series. At the time, she'd almost forgotten about it. Now the offer felt like an exit appearing exactly when she needed one. Better salary, new city, immediate start. She accepted before she could change her mind. Then she began packing. Quietly. Books first, then art supplies, then the framed drawing Ruby had given her. It showed 3 people beneath a treehouse, one tall, one small, one with wild hair. Across the top, Ruby had written, "Our people Sadie held it for a long time," then placed it face down in the box. Ruby discovered the truth by accident. She climbed over the fence looking for a missing purple crayon. The back door was unlocked. Inside she found boxes. Everywhere. Sadie stood in the hallway holding packing tape. Ruby stared at her. "What are those?" Sadie froze. "Ruby, why are your books in boxes?" Sadie lowered the tape. "I got a job." "Here?" "No." The little girl's face changed. "Where?" "Seattle." Ruby's eyes filled. "When are you coming back?" Sadie couldn't answer. Ruby looked around the half-empty room, then at the suitcase near the stairs. "You weren't going to tell me." "I was." "When?" Sadie's silence said enough. Ruby stepped backward. Her mouth trembled. "Everyone leaves eventually." The words were quiet, but they landed harder than a scream. Sadie felt something inside her break. She reached for her. "Ruby," but Ruby turned and ran. Across the yard, through the gate, into her house. Sadie stood alone among the boxes. For years, she had believed leaving first would protect her. Now she understood the truth. Sometimes leaving first only made you the person who caused the same pain you were trying to escape. Ruby did not speak to Miles for nearly an hour. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the framed picture she had drawn for Sadie. Our people Miles sat beside her. He did not tell her everything would be fine. He had learned that promises meant very little when adults were afraid to act. Instead, he asked one question. "Do you want Sadie to leave?" Ruby shook her head immediately. "Do you think I want her to leave?" Another shake. Then she finally looked at him. "She thinks Mama came back." Miles understood. Not everything, but enough. He stood. Ruby wiped her cheeks. "Are you going to stop her?" Miles looked through the window toward Sadie's house. Boxes were visible behind the curtains. "Yes." "How?" He picked up the wooden drawing from Ruby's desk and studied it. Then he noticed something. In every picture Ruby had made during the past few months, there were 3 people, always 3. Ruby, Miles, and Sadie. The answer became obvious. "I need the workshop." Miles did not call Sadie. He did not knock on her door. He did not chase her car down the street with a dramatic speech prepared. Instead, he built something. Because when Miles did not know how to say what mattered, his hands usually found the words first. An hour later, he carried a small wooden sign into the backyard. Ruby followed behind him, trying to peek beneath the cloth covering it. "What does it say?" "You'll see." "Is it romantic?" "I hope so." "Did the internet help?" "No." "Good." Ruby nodded seriously. "The internet told you to communicate." Miles sighed. "I regret telling you that." Together, they climbed into the treehouse. Then they waited. Sadie finished packing just before sunset. Only one box remained open. Inside it lay Ruby's drawing. She tried to place the lid over it. She couldn't. The house felt painfully quiet. No laughter through the fence. No hammering from Miles' workshop. No small voice yelling her name from the backyard. She had spent her entire life believing that disappearing quietly was kinder than being asked to leave. But now, all she had done was teach Ruby that people vanished without warning. Sadie picked up an apple from the kitchen counter. Then, without fully knowing why, she climbed out through the bedroom window, across the porch roof, over the fence, and up the maple tree. One last time. Miles found her in the same place they had first met, sitting on the roof of the treehouse, her legs swinging over the edge, an apple in her hand, tears on her cheeks. She looked at him as he climbed up. "You still don't use the ladder correctly," he said. Sadie laughed weakly. "You still climb like an old man." "I'm 30, ancient." He sat beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Miles placed the wooden sign in her lap. Sadie pulled away the cloth. One word had been carved into the wood, reserved, to spite everything. She smiled. "For who?" Miles looked at her. "For the first person." He took a breath. "Who climbed into our lives without permission." Sadie's smile collapsed into tears. "Miles, you should have asked me." "Asked you what?" "If I wanted Claire back." Sadie looked down. "I saw you together. You saw Ruby with her mother. That's what a family looks like." "No." Miles' voice was quiet, but certain. That's what an apology looks like. Sadie turned toward him. Claire came back because she's sick. She wanted to apologize before treatment. She isn't staying, and even if she were, he shook his head, she wouldn't be replacing you. Sadie swallowed. I was never trying to replace her. I know. I just didn't want to become someone Ruby could lose. Miles looked at her packed house through the branches. So you decided to leave before she could. The truth hurt, because it was simple. Sadie wiped her face. I was scared. So was I. Miles reached into his jacket pocket, but what he took out was not a house key, and not a ring. It was an old purple crayon. Sadie stared at it. Miles rolled it between his fingers. Ruby says this is the one you kept losing during homework. Sadie laughed through her tears. She kept stealing it. She also said every family picture she draws has been missing someone. Sadie's breathing slowed. Miles continued. I spent 4 years rebuilding our life, one routine at a time, one breakfast, one bedtime story, one piece of furniture. He looked around the treehouse. And then you climbed up here one afternoon, and somehow turned that life into a home. Sadie covered her mouth. Miles held out the crayon. Ruby doesn't need someone perfect. Neither do I. We need someone who burns cookies, ruins chairs, climbs fences instead of using gates, and makes this place louder than it has any right to be. Sadie laughed and cried at the same time. Miles reached into his pocket again. This time, he took out a small ring. His hand trembled. Sadie Brooks. She stared at him. Will you marry us? Sadie nodded before he finished the question. Yes. Miles barely had time to breathe before the treehouse window flew open. Ruby's head popped out. I've been waiting for this forever. Miles jerked so hard, the ring nearly slipped from his fingers. Ruby. She climbed onto the roof, grinning. How long have you been there? Long enough. She wrinkled her nose. I almost sneezed. Sadie pulled her into a hug. Ruby wrapped one arm around her and the other around Miles. For the first time, nobody was temporary. Nobody was standing outside. The treehouse had room for all three. A few months later, Miles and Sadie were married in a small backyard ceremony beneath the maple tree. Ruby scattered flower petals in every direction except the aisle. Claire attended briefly, healthier after treatment had begun, and gave Ruby a quiet hug before leaving. There were no dramatic reunions, only careful beginnings. Miles expanded the treehouse. He added a small balcony, a swing, a drawing table for Sadie, a workbench for himself. Above the door hung a new sign, the Bennett Family Treehouse. Beneath it, in smaller letters, built by Miles, climbed first by Sadie, protected by Ruby. That night, the three of them lay on the roof beneath a sky full of stars. Ruby rested between them. So, she looked toward the neighboring fence. What if another neighbor climbs up? Miles wrapped an arm around Sadie, then smiled. Sorry. He looked at the treehouse, then at his wife, then at his daughter. This treehouse already found its family. As this story comes to an end, perhaps the greatest lesson isn't that love arrives in extraordinary ways. It's that family isn't always the one we're born into, or even the one we once lost. Sometimes, family is built one small moment at a time. A shared breakfast, a badly burned batch of cookies, a child who quietly saves you a seat at the table, and a treehouse with room for one more heart. Maybe the people who are truly meant to stay won't knock on your front door. Maybe they'll climb into your life unexpectedly and slowly make it feel like home. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story made you smile, laugh, or reminded you that healing is always possible, we'd love for you to join our growing family by subscribing to Soul-Stirring Stories. There are many more heartwarming journeys waiting for you here. Until next time, take care of yourself and never underestimate the beautiful things that can begin with one unexpected hello.